Over 20 years ago, Channel 4 made a documentary about the Taliban. That documentary showed the atrocities that were taking place. This was way before 9/11. And I remember the footage. It was, obviously, as it always is with these situations, it was blurred, it was pixelated. But it clearly showed young women being taken out into the middle of the football stadium in Kabul. I believe the football stadium was built by the Russians during the occupation. And these women were dragged into the middle of the football stadium and shot in the back of the head, along with men. Their crime, adultery. It showed the horror of the way the Taliban were summarily executing people for the most minor offences. Minor offences, I might add, against Sharia law. And when we fast forward 20 years, many people have forgotten about the horrors of the original Taliban. Many people have forgotten the horrors of the tortures and the mutilations that were taking place in Afghanistan before 9/11. And in fact, if it wasn't for 9/11, if the Taliban had left the West alone, they would probably still have their barbaric medieval system, their barbaric theocracy, punishing, subjugating and brutalising women, children and men. But for 20 years, instead of a brutal regime, Afghanistan had war, and a war that it brought upon itself. Out of all the adventures that the West has been involved in the past 20, 21 years, Afghanistan is surely the most just war that the West has fought, but also the hardest war. In horrendous conditions, horrendous terrain. Many of my friends who are veterans served and fought in Afghanistan. Many of them are suffering the mental and physical consequences of serving and fighting in Afghanistan. Many of them lost friends in that conflict. Men from my regiment were killed when a warrior armoured personnel carrier was hit by a massive bomb. And almost every infantry regiment in the British Army, the Marines, suffered huge casualty rates in the war in Afghanistan. However, when a soldier joins the army, he doesn't join the army to be a social worker. He doesn't join the army to be a police officer or an ambulance driver, even though he may well end up doing those jobs. When a soldier joins the infantry, when he joins one of the elite infantry regiments of the British Army, he joins to fight. He joins to close with and to kill the enemy. And in Afghanistan, the British Army closed with and killed the enemy. And the British Army and the Americans and all the other allied forces that were in Afghanistan held the fanatical zealots of the Taliban at bay for 20 years and allowed normal people in Afghanistan, normal people, because religious zealots that want to kill in the name of their religion are not normal people. The normal people of Afghanistan were given a chance. What Joe Biden has done has taken that chance, ripped it into 1,000 pieces, and allowed that dark veil of Sharia to descend upon Afghanistan once again. And of course, this is almost a mirror image. It's a lot faster, but it's almost a mirror image of what Barack Hussein Obama did in Iraq. Remember? Under Bush, they had some terrible setbacks, terrible mistakes were made, and there's obviously the question of whether Iraq should have ever been invaded in the first place. And that question will reverberate probably for centuries if the world lasts that long. But towards the end of Bush's presidency, under people like General Petraeus and the very aggressive intelligence and military operations that the Americans and the British carried out during the surge, many insurgents were killed and the security situation in Iraq improved markedly. Barack Hussein Obama comes to power and destabilizes the entire Middle East. by his support for the so-called Arab Spring, which was really a jihadist insurgency backed by the United States of America and the European Union. Libya fell. Gaddafi had been brought in from the cold. Gaddafi was an evil, wicked man who'd supported the IRA, who'd armed the IRA, and probably given weapons to the IRA that killed friends of mine, colleagues, and tried to kill me. But Gaddafi had been brought in from the cold. Gaddafi was being rehabilitated. His country was being rehabilitated until Barack Hussein Obama, Hillary Clinton, David Cameron, and Nicolas Sarkozy got their wicked, evil claws into it, destabilised the country, destroyed the country, and allowed it to be turned over to Al-Qaeda type, ISIS type organisations and militias that are still there today. And of course, after Libya came Syria. And the Americans under Barack Hussein Obama wanted Assad toppled. They wanted to get rid of President Assad. Now Assad, again, a vicious, nasty, criminal dictator. But there's one thing about Assad. He was running a secular country. Women were allowed to walk around in jeans and t-shirts with their hair uncovered. There was no Sharia law in Syria, and there still isn't Sharia law in Syria under Assad. Barack Hussein Obama, with Joe Biden as his vice president, destroyed that country. They poured fuel on the fire. They encouraged the Qataris and the Saudis and the Turks to arm and train terrorist organisations who carried out some horrendous atrocities against Alawites, against Christians, and against the Shia. And of course, the destabilisation of Syria, the mass withdrawal of troops from Iraq, led to the formation of ISIS. And exactly the same thing happened with ISIS. Not as quickly, but ISIS swept through Iraq and Syria on a blitzkrieg and imposed their vile, disgusting caliphate. They slaughtered Yazidi women and children, raped the women and then murdered many of them, raped the women and girls and took them as sex slaves, killed the men. Of course, they didn't just kill the Yazidis, they killed the Christians as well. Many Christians in Mosul and the surrounding areas had to flee. And if it wasn't for the brave stand of the Kurds, and we'll talk about the Kurds in a minute and what Donald Trump did with the Kurds, but if it wasn't for the brave stand of the Kurds and even the mercenaries who went from Britain and around the world to fight alongside the Kurds, and they weren't mercenaries, they were actually freedom fighters. If it wasn't for the Kurds and their supporters and American air power, ISIS may well have overrun the whole of Iraq and Syria until the Russians came along and put a halt to ISIS. But of course, all the while, Barack Hussein Obama, the parliamentarians in Westminster, the warmongering parliamentarians in Westminster, cheerleaded by their fans in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Muslim Brotherhood and other wicked jihadist organisations and setups, wanted to destroy Syria and to probably assassinate Assad, the president of Syria. The Russians came along and that all stopped, because was it worth going into a third world war for the sake of winning some ground in Syria, for the sake of toppling another nasty Arab dictator? And of course it wasn't. And the reality of the situation is that to a large extent the Russians turned the tide against ISIS. So that's a quick history lesson, and probably not a very full history lesson, but that's a rough summary of what's happened in the last 20 odd years. But like I said at the very beginning, probably the only really just war in all of this was the war against the Taliban in Afghanistan and the support for the Northern Alliance. And again, I remember the leader of the Northern Alliance being assassinated just before 9/11 happened. As far as I remember, a man dressed as a cameraman, pretending to be a camera crew, took a suicide bomb into the camp where the leader of the Northern Alliance was, and blew himself up along with the leadership of the Northern Alliance. So there was already a war going on. There was already fighting against the Taliban. There was people pushing back, brave men pushing back and fighting against these crazy, ideologically driven jihadis. So fast forward, Biden's now done exactly the same. Biden has continued the foreign policy that his mentor, Barack Hussein Obama, carried out. And of course, that policy is appeasement. That policy is hatred of the West. That policy is that if you just tap the jihadi dog on the head, that savage, vicious Rottweiler will not bite your hand off. It's nonsense. And we will pay the price. When I say we, I mean Western countries will pay the price for Joe Biden's bumbling mistake. But Trump doesn't get off free with this. A lot of people get upset about me attacking Trump. And I genuinely, I've heard he might be standing again in 2024. I hope he doesn't stand again. I hope he has the sense to mentor someone younger and someone who's got ideas and plans that go way beyond what Trump had. Trump was right for America when he got elected, but some of his foreign policy decisions were questionable, to say the least. One of the worst and most treacherous actions he took was when he pulled American troops out and left the Kurds to be attacked by Turkish-trained and Qatari-trained militias. Jihadis, in other words. And the Kurds, who'd fought so bravely to stop ISIS at great cost, at great human cost of men, women and children, the Kurds were betrayed once again by the West and left to their own devices. They're not going to trust the West again, are they? They're maybe going to look elsewhere for support and for training and weapons next time ISIS raises its ugly head in the Levant, which it will do. But going to Afghanistan, Trump decided to pull the troops out. When Biden came to power, Biden didn't have to do that. And he certainly didn't have to do it in the cack-handed and weak way that he did. Just running away in the middle of the night. Not even telling his allies what he was doing. Not telling his allies in the Afghan army what he was doing. And then when it all goes wrong, he blames the Afghan army. And as that Tory MP said last week, that man's never pulled on a uniform. His son may have pulled on a uniform at some point, but Biden's never pulled on a uniform and served his country. He's never faced bomb or bullet. And of course he never will, as he goes into his twilight years. And the sooner Biden exits the stage, the better. But what we've done in Afghanistan is not just a criminal and irresponsible act against the people of Afghanistan who want peace, who want stability, who don't want to live under Sharia law. And I know what the polls say. I've trumpeted these polls from the rooftops many, many times. I know that the polls tell us that 97, 98% of Afghanis want Sharia law. Well, maybe so. But even for the 2% that don't want it, it's worth holding back the Taliban. But that's not why we were in Afghanistan, and this is the whole point. And this is what people are missing. We weren't in Afghanistan to create a liberal democracy. That ended up the mission. That's what you call mission creep. The mission in Afghanistan was to defeat terrorism. The mission in Afghanistan was to deny space for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And the big question is this. Now that the Taliban are back in control, now that they're trying to make allies in China and Russia, will the United States of America, Britain, the rest of the Western allies be able to put troops on the ground to find out what's going on, be able to gain the same sort of human intelligence to find out what's going on? I doubt it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're so sophisticated now they don't need human intelligence. They can do it all electronically, but I doubt it. There'll be ungoverned spaces in Afghanistan that become breeding grounds for ISIS. But not only that, the succor that has been given to jihadis by this criminal withdrawal is massively more consequential than anything that can actually be launched from Afghanistan itself. When you think about the ISIS-inspired terrorist attacks Very few of them brought equipment in from outside of the UK. The suicide bombers made their bombs in the UK. They didn't bring weapons in from Afghanistan or from Iraq. These people were self-starters, and the self-starters, remember, there's 42,000. Now this is according to Ed Hussein, who was a former radical Muslim. Ed Hussein, in his recent book, Among the Mosques, tells us right now there's 42,000 jihadists being watched by the security services. I don't know how they do it. How can you watch 42,000 people? There was only ever probably 2,000 active members of the IRA with maybe 200-300 bombers and shooters right the way during the Troubles. 42,000 is a massive amount of people to have to watch and to have to keep tabs on. And I know electronic surveillance is a lot better than it was, but that is still a massive job. When we started with Veterans Against Terrorism, it was 32,000. It's gone up by 10,000. Who are they? Where are they? What are they planning? And have they been encouraged by the collapse of Afghanistan? Are we going to see, and this is what I predict that at some stage we will see an attempted takeover of a town or city in the United Kingdom by jihadists. I genuinely believe that. A Mumbai on steroids style attack in the UK. And there's that many weapons in Afghanistan. They can afford to lose a huge amount of weapons. Is it beyond the realms of possibility that a weapons consignment will come into the country from Afghanistan? I have a very good friend who is a former Muslim who is very well informed on what's going on within the British Muslim community, and he is convinced that there are weapons being hidden in mosques up and down this country for a doomsday scenario. I don't doubt it. I've no evidence, but I don't doubt it. The other thing is, the Taliban. People may say, well, the Taliban has nothing to do with the UK. It's thousands of miles away. What does it have to do with the UK? The main denomination that provided the ideological support for the Taliban are the Deobandi. The Deobandi is the largest Islamic sect in the UK. Over 40% of mosques are run by Deobandi clerics and Deobandi leaders. Are they preaching anything different in the UK to what they are in Pakistan and Afghanistan, where they're providing cannon fodder for the Taliban? Young Muslim men becoming radicalised and brainwashed and then going and foolishly and wastefully giving their lives fighting against the British and the Americans? Are the Deobandi clerics in the UK any different? Are the Salafi clerics any different to the ones that inspired ISIS in Iraq and Syria and are now inspiring ISIS in West Africa and East Africa, North Africa? What has happened in Afghanistan will give massive succor to our enemies, the jihadists, and massive succor to our enemies in China. And I think I'll finish on this. There's been many shameful statements made by Boris Johnson, by Joe Biden, by the great and the good. But two of them stand out. One was an editorial written by the editor of the Daily Mirror, where he completely belittled and denigrated Britain's place on the world stage. Britain's place on the world stage is not being made smaller by Brexit. It's been made smaller by idiotic leaders and by the stupidity of President Joe Biden. So Kevin Maguire, as ever, has showed his true treacherous colours in this crisis. But worse than that, the head of the British Army. This is a direct quote. This is what he said when he was talking to Kay Burley. The head of the British Army said this. He said, "We've got to collaborate with the Taliban." He said, "We are collaborating with the Taliban." He said, "And they're cooperating with us. We're working with the Taliban." These are all words that the head of the British Army said. Collaborating. He's admitted to being a collaborator. What a shameful thing for the head of the British Army to say. He should be fired. If he was anywhere decent, he'd resign and give up his pension. What a wretched man. What a wretched man you are, General Nick Carter. But what else did he say? He said, we mustn't count the Taliban as our enemies. And he also suggested that they might have changed. When we've got reports that they're already marrying 12-year-old girls and burning women alive for cooking a meal that they didn't approve of. Well, Nick, is that the sort of change that you wanted in the Taliban? Maybe it's good they're not now marrying 9-year-old girls. They're actually marrying 12-year-olds. Is that progress, Nick? No, it's paedophilia. And our general is saying he's collaborating with those scum. So we can do very little about it. We're the little people. We're the people that nobody really cares about and nobody really listens to. We don't matter. But you know something? We do matter. And we can make sure that the government knows that we matter. And I have been working on some web-based infrastructure, and I'll be talking about this more over the next few weeks, where we can organise into groups. We can organise a movement. We've got our own news site. We're going to have our own social media site, and we will be able to connect people free from Facebook, free from the shackles of Facebook, free from the shackles of Twitter, free from the shackles of YouTube even. We'll be able to connect people, and we'll be able to organise. And let's say we've got a news site as well, so we'll be able to post news from all sorts of different sources that are pretty much banned and blocked in the UK. And that's what we're going to do to start with. We're going to start getting organised. So watch this space. The government may have given up and surrendered, but as we said back in the very beginning, first speech I ever made, and I've used the phrase 1,000 times, I'm sure you're bored of listening to it, but we're here to stand, to fight and to protect. And we're going to stand for the United Kingdom, we're going to fight for the United Kingdom, we're going to protect the United Kingdom and its people from those enemies of the state that want to destroy us and destroy our way of life. It's not going to happen. We've got a plan, and it's a good plan. I'll see you all soon.